The alarm did not rise slowly. IT did not give anyone a few seconds to think. Point one moment. Orbital Defense Platform 7 was quiet. Screens were glowing their usual soft blue. People were working through routine reports. The hum of systems was steady and familiar. Then every screen on the station turned red at the same time. Commander Yeldagan was already moving before the first voice came through the intercom. She had been awake for 19 hours, stuck in the back office, going over fuel rotation schedules and supply logs. Her coffee was still warm in her hand when the warning lights flashed. She dropped the cup. IT hit the floor and broke. She stepped over a chair, crossed the room in seconds, and reached the main console before most of the crew had even stood up. That was not training. That was instinct. The kind of instinct a person gets when they spend their whole life looking up at the sky and wondering what might one day come out of it. Report, she said, not loudly. Yale never raised her voice in a crisis. Loud meant panic. Panic got people killed faster than bad luck ever did. Lieutenant Owen Price turned from his station. He was 26, the youngest officer on the platform, and right then all the color had drained from his face. 300 vessels, Commander. Maybe more. They came out of jump 7 minutes ago, beyond the lunar perimeter. No standard identification. No response to hails. Formation pattern reads like a siege ring. Yale's eyes stayed on the screen. A siege ring around what? Price swallowed. Earth. The room went still. 300 ships was not a patrol group. IT was not a warning. IT was not a border dispute. 300 ships in a full ring around a single world meant only one thing. Whoever had come here had already decided how this would end. Yale pulled up the visual feed. For 1 second, even she forgot to breathe. The ships were huge. Not huge in the human way, where a freighter looked large because it carried too much cargo and too much fuel. These ships were huge in the way mountains. Were huge, the kind of size your mind refuses to accept at first. The kind that only becomes real when you compare it to something familiar and realize the comparison does not help at all. The smallest ship in the formation was 3 times longer than the largest warship Earth had ever built, and the biggest ship sat far behind the others. Almost motionless, IT did not move with the fleet. IT watched. Its hull was covered in faint glowing marks that seemed to pulse softly in the dark. That ship in the rear, Yale said. What is it? Price checked his readings once. Then again, command vessel. Energy profile matches Veth Imperial design. Same pattern as the files Dr. Osai prepared 3 years ago. Yale knew those files. She had read them twice. Partly because they mattered. Mostly because Dr. Priya Osai had a way of writing that made you go back and read a second time. The Veth Dominion. 5 species under 1 imperial rule. 40 star systems. 10,000 years of expansion. A civilization so old and so large that most human leaders prefer not to think too hard about it. The Veth had appeared once before, a year and a half earlier. They had reached the edge of the solar system, scanned from a distance, and left without a word. Earth's council had chosen hope over caution. Maybe they were only passing through. Maybe they were not interested. They were interested. The broadcast came 40 seconds later. IT arrived on every frequency at once. That alone meant something. That a message on one channel was communication. That a message on all channels was a declaration. The station's translation system caught the signal and turned it into human speech. The voice came out flat, stripped of emotion the way machine translation always did. IT did not matter. The meaning was cold enough on its own. This message is addressed to the governing bodies of the planet designated Earth and all human installations within this system. The Veth Dominion has reviewed the status of your civilization and determined that your world is eligible for tributary integration. You are granted 72 hours to acknowledge the authority of Emperor Veth Carol and submit a full record of your planetary resources, population, and industrial capacity. Failure to respond will be taken as a declaration of armed resistance. The Dominion fleet in your system will act accordingly. This message will not be repeated. Then the signal CUT, NO second warning, NO added explanation, NO room for misunderstanding. For a moment, the platform was silent. Then everyone began speaking at once. Questions. Orders. Guesswork. Fear. Yale, let it happen for half a minute. People needed that half minute. They needed somewhere for the shock to go. Then she said one word, enough. The room went quiet again. Get me a secure line to the War Council. Tight beam, low signal, and wake Dr. Osai. I do not care what time it is in Nairobi. Price turned back to his console at once. Yale stood still at the main screen and watched the fleet. Stillness was one of her habits when she was thinking hard. Her second officer, Grace Holloway, had once said it was unsettling, like watching someone turn into a statue while everyone else was still moving. Yale had taken that as praise. She was not counting ships. She had already counted those. She was counting something else. The space between the command vessel and its nearest escorts. The timing of their slow orbital movement. The distance between each support ship. The pattern repeated. Wide. Predictable. Unhurried. Not because the Veth were careless. Because they had never had to be anything else. N-01 had ever attacked that ship. N-01 had ever been in a position to even our wide in 10,000 years of empire. The Emperor's vessel had become more than a military asset. IT was a symbol. The center of the whole Dominion idea. The Emperor was not the man who won their wars. He was the reason they believed those wars were already won. And Yale knew something important about symbols. They only stay powerful as long as no one touches them. The moment someone does, the story changes. The War Council came online 18 minutes later. 5 faces appeared on the screen. All older than Yale, all higher in rank, all wearing the same look. That IT was the expression of people staring at a problem so large that ordinary solutions had already become useless. General Frank Aldridge spoke first. He was broad-shouldered, 61, and built like a man who had spent 4 decades preparing for wars between human nations. Now, he was looking at something none of those years had prepared him for. Commander Dagan, he said, you've seen the message. Yes, sir. Then you know we are facing an extinction-level threat. If we answer with force, they outmatch us so badly that my analysts refuse to put the ratio in writing. I understand, sir. Aldridge leaned closer. Then give me your read. What do we do? Yale had been answering that question in her own head since the first moment she saw the Emperor's ship sitting still behind the fleet. We do not fight their kind of war, she said. We fight ours. Aldridge frowned. Explain. I have a plan, sir. It is not comfortable. It is not elegant. And it will not look good in any official document. But it is the only plan I can see that does not end with Earth as a tribute world or a field of ash. No one on the council spoke. Yale went on. I need Dr. Osai. I need a small team. And I need access to the captured Veth shuttle currently stored in Bay 14 of the Lunar Yard. The silence that followed lasted longer this time. Admiral Carol Price leaned toward the screen. You're going to have to repeat that, Commander. Yale did not blink. The shuttle in Bay 14, she said. I want to take it back. General Aldridge slowly covered part of his face with one hand. For a second, he looked less like the head of a war council and more like a tired man realizing the only possible answer had somehow become even worse than the question. You want to do what? Yale kept her voice calm. I want to fly it into their formation. I want to board the command vessel. And I want to force a conversation they are not prepared to have. No one interrupted her. Not because they agreed, because shock had reached a level where it could no longer produce sound. At last, Aldridge lowered his hand. Commander, he said, tell us the plan. 48 hours was not much time to IT was not much time even for a simple military plan. For this plan, it was almost nothing. They were about to take a captured alien shuttle, fly it straight into the center of the most powerful fleet humanity had ever seen, and somehow make it all the way to the Emperor's ship without being stopped. But time was what they had. And Yale Dagan had never once in her career allowed the gap between what she had and what she needed to become an excuse. Bay 14 of the Lunar shipyard was cold when she arrived. The IT was always cold. Not the sharp cold of winter wind, but the empty, lifeless cold of metal walls, recycled air, and forgotten machines. The kind of cold that built up in places where nothing living stayed long enough to warm them. The Veth shuttle had been sitting there for 3 years. That IT had been recovered after a brief clash near the edge of the system, damaged but mostly whole. Salvage teams had brought it back. Engineers had recorded everything they could. Diplomats had said they would decide what to do with it later, and later had never really come. So the shuttle remained, stored, cataloged. Untouched. Yale stopped a few meters from it and looked up that IT was smaller than she had expected on paper. She had known its size. She had read every report. But a set of numbers on a screen and the real thing in front of you were never the same. The shuttle was maybe twice the length of a standard Earth transport craft, but did not look built in the way human ships looked built. Human ships had straight lines, obvious joints, visible panels. This one looked almost grown, its body curve in a long, smooth shape, narrow in some places, wider in others, like it had followed rules no human engineer would have chosen. The hull was a deep gray-green, and under the bay lights it seemed to shift slightly, as if the surface were alive in some quiet way. It's in better shape than I expected. The voice came from behind her. Yale turned out Dr. Priya Osai was walking toward her. She had come on the first available flight from Nairobi, which meant she had spent 8 hours in transit after being woken in the middle of the night, and somehow she still looked completely awake. Osai was 44, compact, sharp-eyed, and calm in the way only very serious people sometimes are. She had the same kind of stillness Yale did. The stillness of someone who thinks quickly and speaks only when the thought is ready. "You've been inside it?" Yale asked. "Several times," Osai said. She stepped up beside her and looked at the shuttle almost fondly. "I spent 14 months studying it after recovery. The control system is strange, but it can be learned. It took me 6 weeks to understand the navigation well enough to operate it safely. I wouldn't say I fly it like a Veth pilot, but I can fly it." Yale nodded once. "That's good enough." Osai glanced at her. "Because I'm flying it?" "Yes." Osai did not look surprised. "I assumed that the moment you said you needed the shuttle and you needed me." She looked back at the vessel. "The real question is whether you believe this can work." Yale thought for a second before answering that IT was a fair question, that IT deserved an honest answer. "I think it is the only plan with any real chance," she said. "That is not the same as believing in it, but it is the best answer I have." Osai considered that for a moment. Then she nodded. "I can work with that." The rest of the team arrived over the next few hours. Yale had asked for 8 people in total, and she had chosen carefully, not the most decorated, not the most famous, not the kind of people a politician would point to in a speech. She wanted something more useful than that. She wanted the right mix of skill and temperament. People who could keep moving when the situation stopped making sense. The first to arrive after Osai was Sergeant Major Riku Tanaka. He was 40, quiet, compact, and moved with the clean economy of someone who had spent years in tight spaces where wasted motion could get you killed. He had once led a team through hostile mountain terrain for 3 weeks with no air support and no resupply, and had brought every one of them home. Not because the mission had been easy, because Tanaka had long ago stopped being impressed by difficulty. He looked at the alien shuttle for a few seconds, then said, "Good shape. Useful." That was all. Lieutenant Grace Holloway came next. She was still Yale's second officer from Platform 7, but here she had a different job. Holloway came from a family of engineers and leads, and she had a talent Yale trusted more than most official reports. She could walk around a machine, stare at it quietly, and see how it thought. She circled the shuttle with a handheld scanner for 10 minutes, checking seams, power flow, structural stress, and the faint energy movement along the hull. When she finished, she said, "Hull integrity is stable. Propulsion system looks functional. Life support can handle our numbers. If this thing fails, it won't be because it was falling apart." "Comforting," Yale said. "Only in a very limited sense," Holloway replied. The others followed. Corporal Dan Wells, quiet and careful, the kind of man people forgot was in the room until they suddenly realized that forgetting him had been a mistake. Lieutenant Ben Ford, communications and signals, who looked mildly embarrassed when he mentioned that he had spent his free time learning Veth trade speech from Osai's research papers. Medic specialist Caitlin, who arrived carrying a medical bag large, enough to suggest she had prepared for disasters Yale had not yet even described. And finally, technician Samir Afer, the primary systems analyst assigned to the shuttle when it had first been recovered, the one person in the system who knew its internal behavior almost as well as Osai did. 8 people against 300 warships. Yale stood in front of them in the cold bay and looked from face to face in, "Oh, dramatic speech," in, "Oh, false comfort." and pretending the odds were anything but what they were. "You know what this is," she said, "and you know what the chances look like. I'm not going to waste your time by pretending otherwise." No one spoke. They were listening. "That fleet out there," she continued, "has spent 10,000 years becoming certain of how weaker civilizations respond. They expect submission, or they expect open resistance. They know how to answer both. What they do not know how to answer is something outside that pattern." She pointed toward the dark hull of the shuttle. "They have no doctrine for a strike like this. Their culture has no story for it. Their emperor's vessel does not defend against it because, in all of their history, nobody has ever been close enough to try." A pause. "We're going to be the first." Silence. Then Tanaka asked the only question that mattered. "Where do we enter?" And just like that, the room changed. The fear did not disappear. IT turned into work. Osai activated the Bay briefing screen and projected a model of the Veth formation into the air above them. A ring of ships surrounded Earth in layers. Outer patrol vessels, the mid-range combat ships, support elements. And behind them all, at the far rear, the command vessel, the Emperor's ship. Osai stepped closer to the display. "The fleet is arranged to stop an external attack," she said. "Heavy sensor overlap, predictable response routes, layered defensive bands. Any human ship trying to push through would be identified almost immediately." "But we aren't using a human ship," Holloway said. "Exactly," Osai replied. She highlighted the shuttle's route. "This vessel still carries the identification pattern of a Veth diplomatic courier. I mapped the broadcast architecture during my first year with it. If the ship's systems behave normally, it will appear on their networks as a legitimate internal transport." Ford looked at the display. "So we belong there, at least on paper. On signal level," Osai said. "Not on visual confirmation." She enlarged part of the route. "The patrol cycles repeat every 30 minutes. There's a 4-minute gap in one corridor between overlapping coverage windows. We need to pass through that corridor, reach the exclusion zone around the command vessel, and dock before anyone has a reason to ask unusual questions." "Define unusual questions," Lynn said. Osai looked at her, "The kind that includes scanning the passengers." That made the room quieter. Ford folded his arms. "And if they do scan us?" Osai answered plainly. "Then they find human biology inside a Veth courier shuttle, and the mission ends very quickly." Tanaka nodded once. "So we do not give them time." "That," Yale said, "is the idea." Osai continued. "The courier class normally has priority clearance between fleet elements. That works in our favor. It means some checks are lighter than usual, but only if we act like we belong. Speed matters. Behavior matters. Nothing about this works if we hesitate." Wells, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "How often do they expect this shuttle class to dock with the command vessel?" Osai brought up another layer of records. "This exact shuttle has docked there before. Its previous navigation history still exists in the onboard system. That is one of the reasons the plan is possible at all. The command ship should recognize it." "Should," Holloway repeated. "Yes," Osai said. "Should." No one smiled. Yale stepped closer to the projection. "The Veth gave us 72 hours because protocol told them to. Not because they needed 72 hours. They believe the next step is one of two things: surrender or visible preparation for war. We are neither. That gives us one advantage. They have no place to put us in their thinking," Ford said. Yale looked at him. "Exactly." The planning went on for 14 straight hours. They worked through routes, timings, equipment, signals, possible failures, fallback positions, likely encounters, boarding order, movement inside the vessel, and what each person would do if things started breaking apart. Then they went through it all again. Then they did a full review of the things most likely to go wrong. That conversation lasted even longer. Yale did not soften any part of it. She never believed in protecting people from the truth when their lives depended on it. Every risk was laid out clearly: sensor verification, biological scans, unexpected patrol movement, shuttle malfunction, internal ship changes since the last records, Imperial guards, command delays, communication loss. The chance that none of it would matter because the Veth might simply react faster than expected, When the review ended, Yale looked at each person one by one and asked the same question. Are you still in? Tanaka answered first. Yes. He said it like the question barely required thought. Ford waited a few seconds before answering, the way a man does when he's checking numbers in his head one final time. Yes. Lynn gave her answer while neatly folding a medical wrap back in her bag. Yes. One after another, they all said IT and O speeches and O brave lines. Just the answered YES, T hour 40 of the 72, the Veth Herald broadcast again. This message was shorter. The Dominion awaits your response. The period has not expired. Your silence will be understood as preparation for submission. The War Council, exactly as Yale had instructed, answered with 4 words that we are considering options, which technically was true to T hour 46. The team boarded the shuttle. There was no ceremony to an O crowd, an O final dramatic countdown. Bay 14 was quiet except for the low hum of station systems and the soft, rising tone of alien machinery waking up after years of stillness. The shuttle's interior was dim and curved, built for bodies that were not human, but close enough that it could still be used. The seats were wrong in small ways. The control surfaces were smooth and oddly placed. The air smelled faintly metallic, with something else underneath that no one could name. Osai settled into the pilot position. Her hands moved over the controls with careful precision. The ship responded like something waking from a deep sleep and recognizing an old language. Lights flowed across the panels in pale green. Systems came online one by one. Holloway checked the support readings. AFER monitored internal response. Ford ran the communications layer. Tanaka sat in silence, already focused. Somewhere far ahead of the room, Yale took the secondary seat behind Osai and looked through the forward screen. Beyond the bay doors was open space. Beyond open space was Earth, and around Earth, like a ring waiting to close, hung the Fleet Point 300 ships. Waiting. Bay 14 opened. The shuttle lifted smoothly, almost too smoothly, and glided out into the dark. No one said anything for the first few seconds. There was too much to say, and none of it would help. Last Osai spoke without looking up. Contact with the formation in 40 minutes. Yale kept her eyes on the screen. Understood. The shuttle moved forward, toward the fleet, toward the Emperor's ship, toward a plan built almost entirely on the idea that no one out there would believe what they were seeing until it was already too late. And as Earth hung below them, small and blue and impossibly fragile beneath that ring of warships, Yale felt the familiar shape of fear settle somewhere deep and quiet inside her. Not the kind that shakes the hands, the useful kind. The kind that sharpens the mind. She looked ahead and thought the same thing humanity had probably thought in one form or another for most of its history. Keep moving. The shuttle entered the formation slowly. That was the first thing Yale noticed. Not because Osai was nervous, because moving too fast would have been wrong. Everything about the mission depended on looking ordinary. And ordinary, inside a fleet like this, meant calm, measured, expected. The Veth fleet was not silent. That surprised Yale more than the size of it had. When people imagined space, they imagined quiet, cold emptiness, stillness without sound. But inside a formation of 300 active warships, silence did not really exist. Not in any way that mattered. The shuttle's passive systems were pulling in layer after layer of electromagnetic traffic. Navigation pulses, system checks, ship-to-ship communication bursts, energy signatures from engines running in low-output maintenance mode. 1,000 machine signals folding over each other like a dense, invisible weather system. That IT was not sound. Not exactly, but it had texture, pressure, presence. Osai had warned them about this. She had explained that the Veth did not experience a fleet the way humans did. To them, this constant network of energy and communication was not just mechanical background. It was social. A kind of constant awareness of where others were, what they were doing, how the whole formation was breathing together. The shuttle was now inserting itself into that awareness. IT was like walking into a room where everyone knew each other and trying to act as if you belonged. The question was simple. Would anyone look closely enough to notice they did not? For the first 12 minutes, no one did. Yale sat behind Osai and watched the tactical display. Their shuttle appeared as a small moving mark between the larger symbols of the surrounding ships. One Veth support vessel drifted off their left side at 800 meters. Another crossed far ahead of them, slow and steady, never changing course in O reaction, an O alarm, an O challenge. Tanaka sat behind Yale with both hands resting on his knees. He had not spoken since takeoff. His face was calm, but Yale knew that look. He was running the mission in his head, step by step, room by room, motion by motion. The way a person walks a route in their mind before walking in the real world. The others were quiet too. Not frozen, focused. Lynn had her medical bag open in her lap, checking and rechecking its contents with small, careful movements. Ford was monitoring the signal channels, one earpiece in place, eyes moving steadily over his screen. Afer watched the shuttle system response, making sure nothing in its behavior drifted outside normal patterns. Holloway studied engineering readouts like she was, reading the mood of the ship itself. Then, at minute 14, a signal arrived. Osai noticed it first. Her hand stopped for half a second on the control surface, then kept moving. Verification hail, she said. Third-tier vessel to port side. Standard courier check. Ford straightened slightly. I have it. He pulled up the response sequence from memory. When he spoke into the comm system, the sound of human speech shaped into Veth trade language filled the shuttle cabin. It was strange to hear. The tones were layered, almost musical in parts, deeper and more harmonic than normal human language. A human could produce it, but only approximately. The patrol vessel answered. Ford listened, then said quietly, they want the routing authority code. Secondary verification. Priya, Yale said. Osai recited the code without looking up .14 characters in the Veth administrative system. Ford translated and sent it back almost immediately. Then came silence at a few seconds, long enough for everyone inside the shuttle to feel each second separately. Then the tone on the incoming channel shifted. The request ended. Ford let out a slow breath. Accepted. Do not waste the breath. Tanaka said from the rear, not unkindly. You may want it later. Ford almost smiled. Understood. They passed the first inner threshold at minute 22. This was the part Osai had marked as the most dangerous. Outside this band, ships were smaller, patrol patterns looser, attention levels lower. Inside it, the main combat vessels held position. These were not support ships. These were the war machines. Massive, heavily armed, and built with sensors strong enough to tear apart almost any disguise if given a reason. 200-meter pass in 3 minutes. Osai said, in a warning in her tone, just fact. Yale looked at the forward display. The heavy cruiser ahead was enormous at that distance. It no longer felt like a ship. It felt like a walled-out dark structure of layered metal, lit in controlled lines by Veth system lights. Its hull carried scale without mercy. There was no part of it that suggested anything human-sized should be near it. The shuttle moved along its assigned path. Closer, closer still. T-200 meters, the cruiser filled the whole screen on Earth. That was close enough to see detail with the naked eye. Close enough to feel like you were brushing past a cliff. Nothing happened. NO shift in orientation, NO sensor spike, and O demand for deeper verification. The courier signal was clean. The approach vector matched expectation, and the Veth had been sitting in this formation for nearly 2 full days without anyone giving them a reason to be afraid of surprises. That was helping them now. Routine was doing part of the work. They cleared the cruiser.Osai's voice stayed level. We are through the mid-range band. 1 minute to exclusion zone. The exclusion zone was a sphere of empty space around the Emperor's command vessel, roughly 5 kilometers in all directions. Inside it, nothing moved except the command ship itself, NO escorts, NO patrols, and NO nearby traffic. IT was not maintained by force. It did not need to be. Protocol alone kept other ships out, but a silent, spatial statement of rank. This vessel is not approached by ordinary things, which was exactly why Yale had chosen it, a place so protected by certainty that it had forgotten how to expect the impossible. Osai guided the shuttle toward the rear docking approach. She was following old navigation history buried in the shuttle's system. Records from flights made before the vessel had ever been captured. If the data was still valid, the command ship would recognize the route. If it did not, Yale did not bother finishing the thought. The docking doors opened automatically. An O challenge. An O delay. Just a smooth widening in the side of the command vessel, revealing a landing cradle lit by low pale light. Yale turned and looked at Osai. Osai looked back. For the first time since launch, something that might have been disbelief touched her face. "Well," she said quietly, "we're here." The shuttle settled into the cradle with a soft mechanical sound, almost like a long breath finally being released. For one moment, no one moved. Not because they were afraid, because arrival had a weight of its own. Everything up to now had been probability. Now it was real. Tanaka unbuckled first. He stood, rolled his neck once, and looked toward the sealed hatch. "Right," he said. "Let's go meet royalty." The docking bay was large and still. Gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal. Air breathable, though cooler than comfortable. The light was dimmer than human standard and carried a pale tone that made the place feel both elegant and empty. The architecture was Veth in every detail. Curved lines, tall arches, functional structures built with a sense of design that was not human, but close enough to be understood. .8 workers were waiting in the bay. Serval cast, if Osai's files were right, tall, narrow, dressed in deep blue garments that marked low ceremonial status. They turned toward the shuttle the moment it landed with the calm attention of people expecting a routine career arrival. Then the hatch opened, and 8 humans stepped out. The reaction was not fear at IT, was not aggression at IT, was something stranger. The complete suspension of response. The frozen stillness of minds encountering something they had no category for. They simply stood there. Yale walked past them without slowing. That was important. Everything depended on momentum now. Tanaka moved at her shoulder. Behind them, the others spread into the pattern they had agreed on. Ford and Osai angled toward the communications access corridor on the bay sidewall. Holloway and Afer moved for the hatch leading toward the ship's internal systems. Wells and Lynn stayed near the bay entrance to hold the point and keep the route back clear. The interior layout was not exact. Some things had changed since the shuttle's recorded data had been made, but the core structure matched Osai's models closely enough. And at the center of the vessel, just as Veth designed, tradition said it would be, lay the Imperial Chamber. Not at the front, where a battlefield commander might watch a fight at the center. Because the Emperor was not treated as a commander, he was treated as the axis around which command itself turned. They crossed 3 corridors. The ship was not empty, but it was not truly military in the way human warships were military. The people they passed were not soldiers ready for close assault. They were attendants, administrators, ceremonial staff, technical workers, and every one of them reacted the same way as the bay workers had: stillness, shock, the complete collapse of expectation. Not because they were weak, because nothing in their lives had prepared them for armed humans walking through the Emperor's ship as if they belonged there. They reached the door to the Imperial Chamber. IT was circular, wide, and covered in decorative symbols that glowed faintly along the frame. Closed. Tanaka stepped forward and placed both hands on the central mechanism. Osai had explained it in detail during planning. The lock was ceremonial first, mechanical second, but he triggered the release. The door opened. The chamber beyond was huge. High ceiling, wide floor, walls marked from top to bottom with glowing bioluminescent sigils in soft living colors. .12 ceremonial. Guards stood in fixed positions around the room in full armor. And at the far end, on a slightly raised section of floor, stood Emperor Veth Carroll. He was enormous, just over 8 feet tall, according to the old files. The files had been right. He turned toward the opening door, and Yale saw something on his face that she had never seen before in her life. Not fear, not anger, not confusion exactly. It was the expression of someone seeing an event so impossible that the mind had not yet decided how to feel about it. Then the guards moved, but these were not close combat soldiers trained for an attack like this. They were ceremonial protectors, built for display. trained for posture, prepared for ritual challenge and formal threat, not direct human speed in confined space. Tanaka crossed the room. He moved the way he always moved when silence no longer mattered. Fast, direct, precise, and wasted effort, and anger, and drama. Just action at a speed the room had not been built to answer. Within 40 seconds, it was over. The guards were disarmed, controlled, and placed against the wall in positions that kept them out of the fight without seriously injuring any of them. The chamber went quiet again. Yale walked forward alone. Every step sounded louder than it should have. She stopped directly in front of Emperor Veth Carroll and looked up. He looked down at her with that same unreadable expression. Yale made sure her voice was clear. My name is Yale Dagan. I represent the United Earth Defense Corps and the people of Earth. A small pause. Then she said, you and I are going to talk. For one heartbeat. The whole chamber seemed to hold still around the sentence. Then Yale raised the communication unit on her wrist and opened a system-wide broadcast, every available frequency. Human and Veth. Her voice went out across the command vessel, across the fleet, across the whole solar system. This is Commander Yale Dagan of the United Earth Defense Corps. I am aboard the Imperial Command Vessel. I have your Emperor. He is alive and unharmed. I'm not here to hurt him, but I am keeping this channel open, and we're going to have a very different conversation from the one your herald started 70 hours ago. She let the words settle, then added, you have 30 minutes to connect your senior commanders to this frequency. If you do not, I will begin describing the inside of this ship in detail to every listener in the system. Your choice. Outside the chamber, outside the vessel, outside the walls of the station-sized flagship itself, the Veth fleet went silent. Not quieter, silent. Then every communications band in the system lit up at once. Yale kept her eyes on the Emperor. He was still looking at her with that same strange expression. After a long moment, he spoke in careful trade speech, measured, precise. You came here, he said, in my ship. Yes, Yale said, from inside my fleet. Yes. A pause. And you're not afraid of me. Yale considered the truth before answering. I have been afraid of many things, she said. I usually find it more useful to focus on what has to happen next. The Emperor was quiet. Then he asked, in a tone that held something like the edge of respect beneath the uncertainty, what kind of species does this? Yale held his gaze. The kind that has been in trouble before, she said, and learned that the only way out is through. At exactly the 1 hour mark, the Emperor made his choice. Until then, the chamber had felt like a place balanced on the edge of something sharp. Every second seemed to wait for a wrong word. Every silence felt dangerous. Then Veth Carroll spoke. Not to Yale his fleet. He spoke in his own language, deep and measured, and forward translated through Yale's earpiece one line at a time. The fleet will withdraw to the transit boundary. No one in the room moved. Not Yale, not Tanaka, not the guard against the wall, not even the Emperor. A formal declaration will be prepared. The human solar system will be recognized as a non-integration zone under Imperial protection. Yale stood completely still. She had built this whole mission on one possibility, one narrow opening, one idea that had felt almost unreasonable when she first saw it. Now that idea was becoming real. The tributary protocol for this system is suspended indefinitely. Then came the final line. This is my instruction. It will be followed. Silence filled the open channel. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of something enormous changing direction that a few seconds later, one of the Veth commanders answered. Only 4 words. It will be followed. That was it. N-O final threat. N-O hidden warning. N-O sudden reversal. Just acceptance that in Yale's ear. Grace Holloway's voice came softly from the shuttle systems. Movement confirmed. Outer formation is changing heading. They're pulling back. For the first time since boarding the command vessel, Yale allowed herself one breath that was not part calculation. Just one. Then she looked at the Emperor. Thank you, she said. He was still watching her. That strange look had not left his face. Only now Yale finally understood it was curiosity. Not weak curiosity. Not casual curiosity. The deep kind. The kind that appears when someone realizes the world is larger than they thought and that their old understanding no longer fits. We will not. Return to your system, the Emperor said. Yale said nothing. Not because you could stop us. Still she said nothing. But because you're something we do not yet understand. He took a slow breath. And the Dominion has rules for what it does not understand. A pause. We observe first. We do not touch. Then he said one more sentence in a language Yale did not know. Ford was quiet for a second. Then he said into her earpiece, I can't translate it exactly. Closest meaning is, you are worth watching. Yale held the Emperor's gaze for one moment longer. Then she turned away, and oh dramatic farewell, and oh final challenge. The work was done. Now they needed to leave before the shape of the moment changed. She signaled the team. They moved immediately. Back through the Imperial chamber, past the ceremonial guards, through the curved corridors of the command vessel. Every person they passed still had that same stunned, frozen look, as if the entire ship had not yet understood what had happened inside. In a way. Maybe it had not. Empires are often slow to understand the moments that change them. The docking bay was exactly as they had left it. The serval workers were still there, still silent, still watching. Yale did not stop. The team boarded the shuttle in practiced order. Osai sealed the hatch. Afer checked systems. Ford reconnected to the signal board. Lynn strapped in with her bag at her feet. Tanaka sat down like a man, finishing one job and already thinking about the next. Holloway looked over the engineering panel one last time. Yale took her seat behind Osai. Take us out, she said. Osai nodded once and guided the shuttle up from the docking cradle. The bay doors opened beyond them. The exclusion zone stretched wide and empty around the Emperor's ship, and beyond that, the fleet was moving 300 ships, turning slowly, massive shapes changing direction with patient precision. The whole formation was withdrawing toward the transit boundary exactly as ordered, and O1 hailed them, and O1 challenged them, and O1 scanned them. The shuttle passed through the retreating armada the same way it had entered it, quietly, almost invisibly, like a thought moving through a crowd before the crowd had time to realize it had been there. They crossed the outer edge of the formation. Open space appeared ahead again. And there, on the forward screen, was Earth, small, blue, distant, the same planet it had been a few hours earlier. And yet somehow not the same at all. Yale looked at it for a long moment. Behind her, Tanaka broke the silence. That went better than I expected. Yale kept watching Earth. Better than you expected, she asked. Or better than you said you expected? There was a pause. Then Tanaka answered, both. That got the smallest possible change from Yale. Not quite a smile. Close enough to count. Ford took out his earpiece and placed it down carefully. What do we tell the War Council? The truth, Yale said, that it worked, that they're leaving, and that we need something more permanent in place before the next time. From the back, Lynn spoke. There'll be a next time? Yale thought about the Emperor's face, about the way curiosity had replaced certainty, about those last words Ford could only partly translate. You are worth watching. Yes, she said at last. There'll be something. The shuttle kept moving toward Earth. The universe is full of things that will want to know what we are, she said. We just have to make sure they keep deciding it's better to ask than to assume. No one answered, and no one needed to. Outside the shuttle, 300 warships were leaving. Not because Earth had defeated them in combat. Not because humanity had matched their power. Not because 8 people had somehow become stronger than an empire. They were leaving because 8 people had done something the empire did not know how to think about. And when you force someone to think in a new way, sometimes that changes everything. Yale thought again of the Emperor's final words. You are worth watching. She turned that over in her mind. Then she thought, that may be the only reputation that matters. Not feared, not admired, not conquered. Worth watching, worth taking seriously, worth trying to understand before making the mistake of thinking you already do. She opened a secure line to the War Council. This is Commander Dagan, she said. We are returning. The fleet is withdrawing. Prepare for full debrief. A short pause. Then she added, and somebody started drafting a first contact framework. If this happens again, I would like a plan that doesn't depend on stealing an Emperor's shuttle. For a second, there was only static. Then Admiral Carol Price answered. Her voice sounded different now. Lighter, still tired, still controlled, but no longer carrying the weight of a world about to die. Understood, Commander Dagan. Good work. Yale closed the channel. The shuttle moved on. Behind them, the Veth fleet continued its slow and careful withdrawal into the dark between worlds to the far rear of the formation. The Emperor's vessel moved last of all. Huge, ceremonial, glowing softly with living signs across its hull. And somewhere inside that ship, Yale knew, sat a ruler who had spent 10,000 years believing he understood the shape of intelligent life. Now he carried a question he had never had before. What are humans, Yale? Watched Earth grow larger on the screen. She thought about war, about survival, about every mistake humanity had made, and every time it had somehow stood up again anyway. She thought about how often people had underestimated them, including themselves. Then she answered the question in her own head that we're the thing that keeps getting back up. She let that sit for a moment. Then she thought, for now, that will have to be enough.